Welcome to Episode 2 of our thrilling series featuring the eerie tales relayed by W. James Blantyre, chronicling the adventurous and harrowing experiences of his remarkable friend, Dr. Tan, in the depths of the Peruvian Amazon. Prepare for another spine-tingling journey into the unknown as the saga continues. It haunted me that we ran away. I'm a scientist. We should have stayed and investigated the lights. Why did I allow fear take hold of me? Was it Mateo's presence? Was his superstition beginning to rub off on me? I knew I had to rectify the situation. We needed to go back the following night and find the lights. We had to investigate. I convinced Mateo to take me on another night trip further down the tributary, though I told him it was to study nocturnal species. The truth behind my motivation might have been too much for him to handle. The rainforest at night is a creature of contradictions, both hushed and teeming with unseen life. The river, a ribbon of black glass, snaked between the tangled jaws of gnarled roots and heavy vines. Frogs called faintly in the distance, their croaks scattered and lonely, but the jungle itself felt wrong. The air was thick, almost viscous, clinging to my skin and filling my lungs with damp heaviness. A pervasive silence crept between the usual nocturnal calls, something deliberate, as though the very forest were holding its breath. Mateo sat at the bow of our canoe, paddle poised mid-stroke. His silhouette was sharp against the faint crescent moonlight filtering through the canopy. He whispered over his shoulder, voice tight and barely audible. "Stay close to the shore, Doctor." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if he even saw me. The water beneath us was ink, smooth and reflective, disturbed only by the soft lap of our paddles. My flashlight stayed off. Somehow, the idea of breaking the darkness with artificial light felt like an intrusion, a spotlight directed into a predator's den. We drifted onward, deeper into an uncharted tributary. The river narrowed, the banks pressing in close, curtained by curtains of vines hanging like skeletal fingers. Above us, the canopy stitched itself tighter, swallowing most of the starlight. And then we saw it again. A glow, faint, greenish, and deliberate, seeped through the dense veil of vegetation ahead. It wasn't natural. This light felt intentional. Mateo froze mid-stroke, his paddle barely breaking the water's surface. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Doctor, look." I didn't respond. Words felt unnecessary, irrelevant even. Maybe he also had a desire to overcome his fear, because surprisingly Mateo pressed on. Slowly, Mateo maneuvered the canoe closer to the glowing source. The vines brushed against us, slick and cold, as if they too recoiled from what lay beyond. When Mateo parted the curtain of foliage, I felt my breath catch in my throat. It sat half submerged in the muddy bank, a metallic pod, roughly 2 meters long. Its curved surface gleamed slick and alien under the sickly green glow it emanated. Patterns, etched and sinuous, crisscrossed its exterior. Organic yet precise, as though they had been grown rather than carved. It reminded me of reptilian scales fossilized in metal. "Is it technology?" I managed to croak, though the word felt woefully inadequate. Mateo shook his head, his lips pale in the ghostly light. "Not like anything I've ever seen, Doctor." The pod pulsed faintly, slow and deep, like the breath of a sleeping creature. The ground beneath us felt wrong, spongy, elastic, as though it resisted our weight. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to turn away, to back up, push the canoe into the current, and never look back. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper and less noble, compelled me forward. The air crackled faintly, an invisible hum making the fine hairs on my arms stand upright. My breathing slowed, each inhale catching in my throat. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the damp mud. My gloved fingers twitched as I raised a trembling hand toward the pod's surface. My fingertips grazed the smooth metal. The reaction was instant. A surge of energy, raw and indescribable, erupted outward. The vines above us snapped like whips, leaves scattering in sharp, dry bursts. The ground shuddered, and the air itself seemed to ripple outward from the pod in an invisible shockwave. Mateo stumbled back, clutching his head with both hands. I felt it too. A deep vibration, drilling into my ribs, rattling my teeth, settling into my skull like a splinter of pure sound. The glow flared, blinding and sharp, burning its ghostly hue into my vision. And then came the sound. A hiss, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it entirely organic. It was a sound of release, of something awakening, something alive. I stumbled backward, boots slipping in the wet mud. My chest heaved, my lungs straining against the electric tension saturating the air. Mateo grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight, and pulled me away. "We have to go!" he barked, his voice cracking. But I couldn't move, not yet. My gaze was still locked on the pod, on the faint shifting of the etched patterns along its surface. They moved, subtle, flowing, almost reactive. The hiss came again, sharper this time. My breath caught in my throat as realization gripped me like a vice. It was aware of us. "Go!" Mateo yanked me harder this time, and my feet finally obeyed. We stumbled into the canoe, shoving off from the muddy bank with frantic strokes. The glow of the pod remained visible for several minutes as we drifted away, like a single unblinking eye watching us fade into the mist. The hum lingered, faint but persistent, thrumming deep in my chest like the echo of a distant drum. Neither of us spoke. The night pressed down around us, broken only by the faint creak of wood and the occasional drip of water into the river. I clutched the edge of the canoe, my fingertips still tingling where they had touched the pod. My pulse drummed in my ears, my mind racing in tangled, frantic loops. Mateo finally spoke, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Whatever that was, it wasn't meant for us to find," he said. I didn't respond because he was right. What had we stumbled upon? Who or what had left it there, pulsing softly in the shadowed silence of the rainforest? I turned once to glance back at the curtain of vines, now dark and featureless. The glow was gone, swallowed by the jungle, as though it had never been there at all. But it had. And whatever it was waiting for something. I hugged my pack tightly to my chest, as if the thin fabric and broken zippers could shield me from the weight of what we had just encountered. Some truths, I realized, are better left buried in the dark, and some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed. The canoe drifted silently downstream, Mateo's paddle slicing through the black water in rhythmic strokes. Above us, faint threads of moonlight stitched through gaps in the canopy, tracing fractured silver paths across the rippling surface. The jungle was alive, but off. The chirps of insects, the croaks of frogs, the distant cry of a nocturnal bird. They were all there, yet they felt like echoes rather than the vibrant chorus of life I had come to expect. Beneath it all lay a waiting stillness, like the forest itself was watching us back. I kept my flashlight off, relying on the pale glow of the moon instead. Artificial light felt too brazen here, too much like announcing ourselves to something better, left undisturbed. Mateo sat at the bow, his silhouette hunched low, every movement deliberate, every glance toward the tangled riverbanks sharp with suspicion. He moved with the instinctive grace of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the moods of rivers and forests. But tonight, his movements felt cautious, almost reluctant. The pod was behind us now, swallowed by darkness and the veil of vines. Its sickly green glow no longer visible, yet its presence lingered. The hum, that deep vibration, still reverberated faintly in my chest, like a phantom ache left by something impossibly large and distant. For a long while, we said nothing. Then, movement. Out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of motion. Just at the edge of perception. A brief disruption against the faint moonlit sheen on bark. My head snapped to the side, breath catching in my throat. There it was. A figure, tall and humanoid, stood partially obscured by the gnarled trunk of a tree. Its outline was unmistakable, broad shoulders, elongated limbs, and skin that caught the moonlight with an oily sheen, scales reflecting faint flashes of amber and green. But it was the eyes that froze me. Twin slits of polished amber, faintly luminous, staring directly at me. There was no hesitation in that gaze, no flicker of uncertainty, just pure, unreadable intent. Every rational thought in my brain collapsed under the weight of that stare. My training, my reasoning, it all crumbled into silence. Fight, flight, neither. I was locked in place, my breath shallow, my hands trembling against the edge of the canoe. And then, it moved. Not like an animal or even a person. It melted backward, slipping into the undergrowth with an impossible fluidity, its form dissolving into the shadows as though it had never been there at all. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice cracking despite my effort to steady it. Mateo didn't answer immediately. His grip on the paddle was tight enough to make his knuckles pale, his breathing sharp and uneven. Finally, in a voice barely above a murmur, he said, "Serpientes de la noche," snakes of the night. His gaze met mine, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Resignation. "Doctor," he said, his voice hoarse, "we have to move, now. Whatever that was, it's still watching us." I swallowed hard. My mind was tripping over fragments of earlier warnings, Mateo's stories, the folklore that had seemed so easy to dismiss under daylight. Serpentine devils, beings who stalked the night, appearing when the jungle fell unnaturally still. They were myths, weren't they? Folklore wrapped in fear and ancient whispers. But myths don't have eyes like that. Myths don't stare back at you from the shadows. I considered asking Mateo more, to explain, to tell me exactly what he knew, but the moment passed. His paddle dipped into the water again, harder this time, and the canoe surged forward. The jungle's narrow arteries of water closed around us, vines brushing our shoulders, branches arching above like skeletal arms. I gripped the sides of the canoe, my knuckles aching from the strain. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, nudged deeper into the jungle's labyrinthine veins by something patient, something that understood this place better than we ever could. For all my years of scientific training, for the countless charts, data sets, and carefully annotated field journals, I had no framework for what I had just seen. No hypothesis could explain those eyes, nor the way the creature's presence felt like it was woven into the fabric of the night itself. We aren't alone out here. The thought drilled itself into my chest, an anchor I couldn't shake loose. And worse still, they've been watching us for a long time. The river stretched before us, a mirror of liquid silver, reflecting thin threads of moonlight as they bled through the canopy. It was too still, too quiet. Even the night chorus, frogs, insects, distant howls, had abandoned us. It was as if the jungle itself had drawn in a sharp breath and was holding it, waiting. "Rápido, doctor!" Mateo hissed, his paddle slicing into the water with sharp, urgent strokes. I followed suit, muscles straining as we fought the current. Then, the light returned. A faint glow, greenish and sharp, bled through the cracks in the treetops. It was an artificial light, colder and harder than anything nature could produce. A hum, not a sound but a vibration, resonated up through the canoe, into my spine, and into my teeth. I looked up and froze. Above the canopy, partially obscured by twisting branches, something hovered. Not an object, not a craft, not in the traditional sense. It shimmered at the edges like heat rising off asphalt, distorting the space around it. It felt impossible, and yet there it was, a presence that loomed rather than floated. A beam of light stabbed downward, slicing through the mist like a scalpel. Wherever it touched, leaves curled inward as if scorched, bark cracked and twisted, and branches bent away from the intrusion. The beam swept closer, deliberate and predatory. "Agachese!" Mateo barked. "Get down!" We dropped low, bodies pressed into the wet wood of the canoe. The beam swept over us, reflecting faintly on the surface of the river, making it glow briefly like molten emerald. A log drifted into our path, a bloated, moss-covered obstacle half submerged in the current. Mateo's paddle lashed out, steering us narrowly around it, but the beam doubled back. It lingered just behind us, the light refracting off the water, catching Mateo's face in a fleeting, ghastly glow. His expression was a portrait of raw fear, a man who had spent a lifetime on these rivers and still realized he was utterly powerless against whatever hunted us from above. The beam swept again, and this time it touched the water. A faint hiss rose from where the light met the river, tiny bubbles foaming to the surface. The air filled with the sharp, acrid scent of ozone. "Left!" I shouted, panic cracking through my voice. I shoved my paddle into the water, veering us hard away from the beam's focus. The canoe lurched violently, branches whipping across our faces. As Mateo guided us into a narrow channel, the river narrowed to less than 10 feet across, hemmed in by tangled vines and exposed roots jutting out like skeletal fingers. Above us, the canopy closed in, sealing us in suffocating darkness. "Do you think it saw us?" I asked breathlessly, voice trembling despite my efforts to steady it. Mateo didn't answer. His focus was locked ahead, sweat glistening on his brow, despite the cool night air. Behind us, the light continued its slow, methodical sweep. The hum grew fainter, but it didn't vanish entirely. The thing, craft, presence, predator, whatever it was still there, still searching. We paddled in silence, our breaths ragged, our muscles burning with fatigue. Time stretched and warped. Was it minutes? Hours? The darkness swallowed any sense of progress, any clear sense of escape. Finally, Mateo stopped paddling. He raised a hand, a universal signal for silence, and we drifted, letting the river's sluggish current carry us forward. Above us, the green light faded, dissolving into the dense tapestry of leaves and shadow. The hum retreated into the distance, like an echo rolling back into the throat of some unfathomable cavern. But I didn't feel relief. The silence was too heavy, too deliberate, like something was holding its breath with us. And that's when I realized it. The craft hadn't stopped hunting us. It hadn't given up or flown away. It was waiting, watching. And a thought clawed its way up from the pit of my stomach and settled into my chest like a cold, immovable weight. Did it let us go? Or was it hurting us somewhere else? Thank you for watching episode 2, and please don't miss episode 3, where the mystery deepens. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss a moment. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. See you soon on Eerie Encounters.